Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. Recorded Future. They help security teams make more confident decisions faster. Recorded Future's technology automates broad collection and analysis of cyber threat data and delivers the rich external context you need to understand alerts and emerging threats. With real-time threat intelligence from Recorded Future, security teams respond to threats 63% faster and find undetected threats 10 times quicker. To get started, go to recordedfuture.com/securityweekly and sign up for the Recorded Future Cyber Daily. Every day, you'll receive an email with the top results for trending technical indicators, cyber news, exploited vulnerabilities, suspicious IP addresses, and more. Subscribe today and stay ahead of cyber attacks. Endgame's converged endpoint security platform is transforming security programs. Their people, processes, and technology with the most powerful endpoint protection and simplest user experience, ensuring analysts of any skill level can stop targeted attacks before information theft. Endgame unifies prevention, detection, and threat hunting to stop known and unknown attacker behaviors at scale with a single agent. For more information, visit endgame.com. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Quick announcement before we get started. Many of you have told us that we've got a lot of content and you're getting overwhelmed. And so in response to that,
hooray!
We are, I guess it's better than not producing enough content, right? So we're building our listener interests list so we can send you targeted content based on your customizable list of interests. You can go to securityweekly.com/subscribe, click the button to join the listener list, and we'll get on that. And I spoke with several listeners recently that were appreciative of the fact that we are doing that. John Strand's also teaching active defense and cyber deception at Black Hat 2019. I'd be surprised if it's probably pretty close to sold out at this point. You can go to blackhat.com and register for that training. Chris Brenton, of course, has been in IT and security for over 20 years. A little background about Chris. He has authored several books, including Mastering Cisco Routers and Mastering Network Security. I've actually read Mastering Cisco Routers. It's a very, very good book. He's been involved with several projects, including the HoneyNet project, where he was one of the founding members. Did some stuff with PCI and the PCI standards, the Cloud Security Alliance. Did I read that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, sorry. I'm a little slow today, Chris. He was a fellow...
I forget this stuff.
He was a fellow Level Sans instructor, and today he runs operations for Active Countermeasures. He was John Strand and I's top pick, and thankfully accepted the position to come in Active Countermeasures and help us, pretty much run the company, which is awesome.
Cause trouble.
Yes, and cause trouble and keep us out of trouble at the same time. So, Chris, welcome back to Security Weekly.
Hey, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
It's good to have you, Chris. Now, we had originally talked, you were going to talk a little bit about IPFix and NetFlow, but I don't know if you decided to change directions. Totally up to you, dude.
Yeah, I can certainly bring that in as well.
Okay.
I kind of wanted to define the space, and we can certainly kind of pull that in as part of it.
Awesome. And you've got a few slides and a demo of the AI Hunter product.
I do.
Sweet. It's awesome.
Yeah, let me just share that off. Hopefully that be working.
Yes, we can see it. There's a hole in my security posture.
Yes. Yeah. I will admit, Babylon 5, one of my guilty pleasures. That was a fun series, but it's also kind of appropriate, this as well as your comment about, bringing me in, you and John bringing me in, because that moment was like a total red pill moment. It was one of these deals where I felt like I had a handle on, holistic security and how the architecture needs to get laid out. And when I talked to you and John, it was like, oh my God, there's this big, huge gaping hole to drive a truck through that nobody's catching, nobody's doing anything about. And, this is a way to go in and focus in on that. And it's something that I think a lot of people really still kind of disconnect on. And a lot of it for me comes down to when you look at our current security solutions, everything really falls into one of two buckets. It's protection, keep the bad guys out. So that could be your endpoint security, that could be two-factor authentication, firewall, the list goes on and on. Or it's what we do once we know the bad guys are there. It's our incident handling, it's our forensics. The issue is, how do we bridge those two? And, we think we know, and we think we've been doing it, but when you start looking into the data, it's just not working.
Yeah.
The number
sorry,
one
Chris,
thing
for our audio listeners, especially, if you go to securityweekly.com/ACM, you can find the slides from this segment and also request a demo. But if you're more like we're reading off the slides, I don't know if you're listening, you're like, how do I get the slides? securityweekly.com/ACM. Sorry, Chris, continue.
Paul has all. That's really what it comes down to. Paul has it all.
So will this be recorded for later? Every webcast.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Every webcast.
Yes, and complete with mine. Yes. Yes. The whole thing will be there for later. So a lot of us think we're doing this right, and we're going through logging. And this was something that I was one of the folks that was involved with creating the first logging analysis class for SAMs. And I was trying to do threat hunting with that course back before threat hunting was even like a keyword. And at that point, I realized how frustrating it was. And it was an epitome for me. I'm using the wrong tool. We think syslog is the right tool to use for security because it logs and, archiving data is good for security. If that's the case, where's the security facility or severity? There isn't one. So what we end up doing is, okay, so now it comes down to context. You got to read every log and figure out if it's security related. And oh my God, it's a mess because every app is different. Nobody really documents everything that they do.
Yeah, Chris, I feel like we find out more that our security has been breached from third parties or because business operations has come to a standstill in various areas of the organization. And those seem to be more frequently occurring than, especially back in the day, what we could glean from logs.
So it's kind of funny. I was talking to let's call them an organization that processes financial transactions. And I was talking to a person that was in the process of trying to get a real network-based threat team off the line. And up to this point, they've been working on system logs. And one of the ways they were trying to prove, no, look, we got a gaping hole, is they did some red teaming against their own network, and they were able to break in and they were able to create an HTTP tunnel back out again. And the core, what's supposed to detect this stuff for them is their logging group that, runs everything through a specific, commercial logging solution. And, their response was, oh, don't worry about it. We have this covered. We wrote a signature for this. And it's like, well, wait a minute. So what you're saying is if you get attacked exactly the same way again, you can catch it.
Right.
If they change anything, they're under the radar. Clearly this ain't working. And like I said, when you look at the data, that really, to me, highlights. You look at that average 199 days to ID a breach. Now, granted, look who it came from, but when you look at like IBM and Verizon, they're in like the 193 range for this. So, that to me looks like an accurate number.
Jack is rolling over in his grave right now, but he's not dead yet. He's not dead yet. I don't want to start that rumor.
There is evidence, Chris, that I've seen, and it's circumstantial. I would say that we have gotten better at detecting a breach, but in my opinion, there's still far too much time that goes by on average.
Well, and I think there's 2 points we need to look at too. And Paul, you just brought this up, which is that 191 days, was that the organization themselves figuring out, oh no, something's gone wrong?
Or someone else.
Probably not. Mm-hmm. Or is that some third party saying, hey, why are you attacking me? Mm-hmm. Or, in the case of Citrix, the FBI contacting you saying, hey, just so you know, you've been owned.
Yeah. Working at a university, Joff can attest to this, right? In the early 2000s, more people would report breaches to us than we could discover on any, given day.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Exactly.
Oh, absolutely.
So if you think you're doing threat hunting, clearly you're not, mm-hmm. because otherwise that number would not be that large. So why is this a problem? Well, for one, this is a hard problem to solve, and we really haven't had good tools to try and solve this problem. The other is that, and I hate to say this, but as it matters, but it's not an attestation requirement. And because it's not an attestation requirement, it flies under the radar. And a perfect example of that is how many organizations we've seen in the news that process credit cards that received their PCI DSS attestation while being in a compromised state. And if there was something in the attestation that said, we must validate you were clean from compromises as part of getting this, that might have caught that. But that hasn't been part of a requirement. Now, that is starting to change. I don't know if you folks have noticed the Cyber Catalyst initiative that's taken place. But it's being run by the it's being run by the insurance industry for the folks that are giving cyber insurance. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Their perspective is, okay, you want insurance. If I'm going to insure you, I need to know what state you're in for sure. It's kind of like saying, I want to insure my car, but I don't want you to see if there's any dents on it already that I might claim right away. So they've got a lot of focus in this area to be able to, how do we validate a network is not currently in a compromised state? This to me is awesome because it's going to start driving this stuff home, and hopefully we start seeing this get propagated out to other attestations as well. But this is why, you guys went through and created RITA and Al-Hunter, and this is why we're driving so hard on this, was because, to try and do this through logs, it isn't going to happen. The network's the great equalizer. So to go in and look at this from a logging perspective, to go in and look at this from on the wire perspective, it's an attacker can hide from your logs. They can't hide on the network. They can try and mix in with the rest of the traffic and look a little bit more normal, but they can't just blatantly hide it. So if you know what you're doing, you can pull this stuff out. There's a couple of ways to go after this. One is full-blown PCAPs. That's a lot of data to deal with. Bro's a great tool. That's a tool we rely on a lot. It gives great network fidelity. It's metadata. So you're not getting a full PCAP capture, but you're kind of getting everything that you need to really go through and do an effective threat analysis.
Now, Chris, I want to stop you there because we're talking about Bro and collecting traffic, and I want to see if you agree with me on this front. I've observed a lot better technology and more readily available for capturing raw network traffic at very high speeds, up to 100 gig. Is that, in your belief, is that technology really has come a long way since in the past, 10 years?
Yeah, so I would say it's definitely come a long way. I've seen a couple of folks talk to a few people at RSA that have network cards that are supposed to be able to scale you up into that range there. I have not personally tested them yet. I know that's something that we're in the process of going through and doing at ACM. We've reached out to a couple of vendors. We want to work with them because right now we're kind of at a point where if you get to 2 gigabit, it's really hard to build a box yourself with standard NICs that it's going to keep up without packet loss. And, after that, core light's an option. And, that's certainly the way a lot of folks want to go. But for some people, they want to be able to build this stuff themselves. It'd be nice to have some good solutions around there. So, yeah, that's definitely coming up. And it's helpful because one of the things we've run into is that when we scale past what we can packet capture, we start looking at IPFix and NetFlow. And IPFix and NetFlow are cool, but we need to remember it's sample data, meaning that a router or a switch or whatever is generating that traffic is designed to say, my primary job is to route and switch and whatever it's, whatever they sold it to do. IPFix is way down on the list. So if that box,
Chris, is that still true today? I mean, even with the technology like FPGAs and the processors we have today, even still, a router or network device under load is still going to NetFlow, and IPFix is the first thing it's going to stop doing, right?
Yeah, we support IPFix and NetFlow, and that is one of the things that we're seeing is that flows are taking place on the network. You see them with the packet sniffer, but then when you see what IPFix or NetFlow, specifically NetFlow 9, is reporting, it's not a full capture of what actually took place as part of that data. We've actually had to go in and rewrite the way we detect beacons. To say, okay, we have to assume we're not seeing all the data. We're only working with sample data. How do we give similar results going through and doing that type of thing? So yeah, so unfortunately, it is still a problem. And so there's two things. One is you're going to miss things because again, it's sample data. Number two, it's a fidelity issue. You're just not ever going to extract as much information out of it as you would out of a raw packet capture type of tool.
And what I find interesting too, Chris, is in this approach where you're looking for a signal or sign of some type of beacon, missing packets or even not collecting the right timestamps for all of the packets is problematic. It's not like the passive vulnerability scanner, right, where it's looking a basic example for a user agent string, and it may drop 20% of the traffic, but you send your user agent string, hundreds and hundreds of times in a given hour even. So if I drop some traffic, not a big deal. But when we're talking about beacon analysis, dropping even one packet could be very problematic.
Yeah, and certainly that comes down to the time frequency of the beacon. You're right. If somebody's beaconing once per hour and you have a 25% packet loss, good luck figuring out that's a beacon.
Right.
Now, if it's beaconing twice a second and you have 20% packet loss, you might still be able to pull that in at that point there. But it's certainly not going to be as accurate. So yeah, but that's again why the whole AI Hunter thing came from, as you know very well, Paul.
Yeah.
So this is what we've kind of come up with to go after this problem. So the idea is span port, network tap, pick your poison, capture all traffic going in and out of the internet link. And the focus is on one thing and one thing alone, which is there any command and control traffic going by on the network? Now, we're not an alert system. We do generate alerts. So you can go in and say, hey, I want to send this to a Slack channel, or I want to send this to my Splunk server, or whatever you want to do. You can do that, but it's not based on a unique situation. We kind of combine a bunch of things together. What we look for is there a persistent communication session taking place between an internal system and the internet? Yes or no? Is there a beacon? Is there a long connection? Is there something like that? If so, that now starts making it look interesting. Now we'll look at other things like, is the user agent unique versus the rest of your network? Or is it on a blacklist? Or is the way it negotiates an SSL session different versus your other systems? So we would never alert on like a bad cert. But if we see a beacon going to a bad cert from an SSL client communicate session that looks different from everybody else, oh yeah, that's worth going in and paying attention to. And what we do is we take all that, combine it into a threat score, and then that becomes the action item list. So what our customers are doing is you can go in and you can say, hey, anything that has a threat score of, let's say, 90 or higher, drop that to this Slack channel, drop that to my logging server, whatever you want to do. That gives you a heads up, hey, I should go take a look at the dashboard and see what's going on. And everything over here is clickable. So everything over here I can go through and I can say, oh, hey, you're assigning points for the beacon score. What does that mean? Well, if you click on it, we'll go through and we'll give you all that information when Comcast is not filtering traffic. There we go. And so a couple things to kind of talk through here. So timeline down the bottom. One of the big things we do different versus everybody else is we're looking at 24-hour chunks of data. So when you look at like Darktrace and the Cisco's and the other stuff out there, looking at very brief periods of time. Well, if you've got a beacon going off every 10, 15 minutes or once per hour, you're never going to catch it. With a 24-hour block, you get a much better chance going through that.
It's about the resolution.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's about the resolution or that lack thereof.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It is a lot of data to process, and it's a lot of data to try and process continuously. But I will say we have some amazing engineers, and we've got this down to where, we can do a continuous threat hunt and, give you a notification saying, hey, yeah, we're looking at the last 24 hours, and this system used to have a threat score of 50, and now it's a 95. That may be something you might want to go in and pay attention to. But we've been talking a lot about time analysis. I actually wanted to change gears off of that a little bit because there's some cool stuff you can get into if you actually start doing something similar with size. So this is GCAT. So GCAT is that backdoor that the Russians used against the Ukrainian power grid that, basically took everything down. And what they did is they dropped some malware on an internal system and set up what looked like a user checking their Gmail. So it was going out to Gmail on a regular basis, checking the user. And what's interesting is that a lot of the solutions that say, oh, we do threat hunting, they totally whitelist out Office 365 and Gmail because all they're looking at is timing. And if I look at the signal here, so my resolution here is X is time, Y is quantity. So I'm looking at how many times did this thing call out at a specific time interval. And you can see it's not exactly persistent, but it's pretty close. Now, think about your email client, though. Your email client's going to call out on a regular interval as well. So is this malware? Is this a user? You can't really tell. Well, when you go in and look at size, this becomes a whole lot clearer. Because if you think about how email works, sometimes when I check the mail, there's nothing. Sometimes there's one sentence. Sometimes there's a paragraph. Sometimes there's attachments. So when I analyze a user checking their email over the course of a day, I see a ton of spikes here for the different session sizes that took place. If I look at this, I have one predominant spike. That's my heartbeat. That's the system calling home saying, hey, do you have anything for me to do? So not only can we tell that, yeah, this connection going out to Gmail is in fact a backdoor, we can tell you it's a backdoor, it's been activated, but no one's actually done anything with it yet. So if you can get in there and get that shut down, you haven't lost any files yet. They haven't put a rootkit on the system or anything along those lines. So again, it's that whole hunt this on the network versus system logs, and oh my God, there's just so much you can do with this.
So what you're saying is, if your beacon is doing that type of traffic via Gmail, you need to vary the size of your payload to more accurately make it look like actual email.
Exactly. You can go through.
Good observation there. Yeah, for sure.
One thing that's kind of cool is we are obviously very closely associated with Black Hills. So there's this constant contest of their red teaming a customer that's running our software. So we're trying to detect them so that they get caught, but they don't want to get caught. So they're modifying their tools to run even better. But we get the benefit of seeing what they were doing, so we can work that into our code. And yeah, it's this like great rivalry / symbiotic relationship that's pretty cool.
And that's what I love most about the product, Chris, is that it not only takes the expertise that we have as analysts looking for bad things in the network, but it also takes the expertise of the attackers. Yes. And that's getting funneled into the product. So they were always making good strides forward and trying to make it easy for someone to do the analysis that doesn't have the 20 plus years of experience looking at things like the scenario Chris was talking about. We look at that and go, yeah, that's abnormal for email, right?
Right.
But not everyone has all that experience in every single area. And so by putting that into a tool, I think is one of the more powerful things.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes down to, in fact, I think you were involved with that Twitter conversation where we were talking about, do red teamers make better backdoors than the actual bad guys? And the final verdict a lot of people agreed on is, yeah, the red teamers are doing it better. But there's a reason for that. When you think about red teamers, it's Moore's technology adoption curve is really what it comes down to. When you look at red teamers, those are the innovators. Those are the folks that are doing this for the love of the technology. Those are the folks that just the pure joy is being able to make that backdoor, make it happen. They don't care about monetizing it. That's for the folks that they work for. You figure out how to make money out of how good I am at this. I'm just in it to win it. When you look at the actual bad guys, no. They're early adopters at best, probably early majority. So they only care about the backdoor when that's an inhibitor to their business model. When they can't when they've figured out how to drop the malware on the system, how to monetize it, when all those other things are worried about, now they worry about how stealthy they are on the back door. So they tend to kind of trail what the red teamers are doing, which is for us is awesome because we get to go see what they're doing and work that into the product before it actually hits the wild.
Right. Also, and Chris, I think like in Larry's case, right, you've got to be successful on any particular engagement, right? When you flip to the attackers, if 10 to 15% of the time, they're getting caught and their malware is getting eradicated, whatever. The other 85% of the time are having great success. I think when attackers start to really change their game is when that percentage where they're getting caught is creeping up into the 30, 40%. And like Chris said, it's affecting the revenue model. Now I got to change tactics. But if I'm getting caught sometimes, it's not a big deal, right? I can burn my infrastructure, maybe start over or whatever.
My question is now what becomes the tipping point? So as expert red teamers that were able to evade all of these products, the products are reacting and are now starting to catch us more and more often. So we have to react differently, and as a red teamer, we have to evolve to get around all these protections. Yet the evil quote bad guys are lagging behind some of the red team type of tactics.
Absolutely.
When is it going to switch? And
that's easy.
Where's the tipping point?
When they look at it, it's a straight business call. When you look at why are we not making revenue? Is it because we're not getting the malware on the system? We haven't figured out how to monetize it. We're getting caught on our back door. When that percentage is higher than the others, that's when they go in and address the problem. Yep. But if the problem right now is how do we get people to pay us money once we break into their system, that's totally going to have their focus before this will, because again, it's all about how do we monetize.
Yep, absolutely.
Again, Moore's technology adoption curve, that explains so many different things in life.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I have a question or two.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Go for it, man. Go for it.
You prefaced this. Hi, I'm Jeff, by the way. I don't think we've met. You prefaced this at the very beginning by saying that there isn't an attestation for this. So I've got a couple questions along those lines. And I'm assuming you were talking PCI.
Yep. PCI, SOC 2, ISO 27001. I've dug through a couple of them. I haven't seen anything in there.
Yeah, but PCI is the only thing that really counts.
Says Jeff.
Says Jeff. So, first question is, you're obviously familiar with PCI. You've done that in the past, been part of SIGs and whatnot. So, what is missing from the PCI standard that you think needs to be added that would sweep this up and address it?
So today you need to have an external scan, and you need to get a little certificate that says you passed the scan. We need to do something else like that that's similar, but something similar to that, but is a validation that the network's not currently in a compromised state. I know it sounds really simple, and wow, it is really simple to say. The implementation is harder, but hey, that's what SIGs are for, right? To kind of go through, hash this stuff out. I have my opinions of how it should work, but I also know I'm kind of skewed by my history, what works for me, and the projects I'm involved with, including this one, and RITA, which is our open source solution that does similar to this. It's just command line based.
Okay, so that was a rather non-specific response, but that's fine.
No, I think that was actually pretty specific. We need a way to go through and validate: is that network backdoor? If you're
it's not specific in the sense of what do you think that should be? What is the thing that's missing that you would add?
Okay, I think we have a disconnect, because what I'm saying is that there needs to be maybe some sort of third-party assessment or some list of acceptable tools that you can go through and you can run some PCI acceptable configuration or check and have that come back in a specified state to be able to say, yeah, this is clean. So to just roll with a full example, maybe it's, hey, RITA, our open source tool, you need to run this, and you need to make sure that nothing on the network is scoring higher than a 90% probability of being a beacon, or if it is, there's some sort of exception that's been applied for that, or that's been identified for that.
Well, let me ask the question a different way. If you were trying to get onto a Gartner Magic Quadrant, what would the name of that Magic Quadrant be?
So it's funny, because I had a conversation with Anton not too long ago. We were arguing about this because he was saying, oh, no, we have a quadrant for this. It's endpoint protection, and it's not. He was also saying, well, then you could put it into, network assessment, and it's really not. We're not talking about like who's the busiest user on your network or who's streaming the most videos. Who cares? We're talking about, is a system owned, yes or no? Is there a threat on your network that you need to be concerned about? Yes or no? And there really isn't a magic quadrant for that right now. And him and I decided we're kicking the conversation until June, when we'll both be at Gartner and we'll do it over drinks, because that's the best way to sort this stuff out, right? Is over alcohol.
So the goal of meeting in June is going to be to come up with a name for this new quadrant.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I'd be good with that. Okay. That may not be what happens, but at the very least, I'll get a chance to catch up with them.
At the very least, you'll be drinking.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, isn't that really all that matters?
And once you have a name for it, then we can have a discussion of whether it's already in PCI or not. So we'll table that for later. How's that?
Okay, dude, if this was in PCI, so let me turn the question on you. If this is already in PCI, how are we, how are people receiving their attestation while they're in a compromised state? There should be some control that says, oh no, you're compromised, therefore you cannot receive an attestation yet. You must clear them off your network first.
Well, to answer that question, we have to really quickly go through what PCI requires, which is, first of all, a secure network. Second is secure systems. Third, securing your data, whether it's at rest or in transit. 5 is providing endpoint protection. I'm using that term loosely. 6 is keeping everything current with patching, and if you're writing applications, you have to do secure coding and have your developers be trained and keep everything patched and secure, and push everything out with change management. Limited access of users, have access control, have strong passwords, yada, 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 have strong physical security controls, have monitoring and logging set up with review of the logs and monitors. And from a security perspective, you have to do internal scanning, vulnerability scanning, external vulnerability scanning, annual penetration testing inside and out, file integrity monitoring, intrusion detection at strategic places in your network, do an annual risk assessment, have an incident response plan. So what's missing?
We are filling here. We're filling here.
Yeah, I was going to say, Chris, you have a slide on that.
But wait, there's more.
You're right. There's a ton of stuff in there, and there's a ton of stuff that you could look at and say, well, if you look at this from a general perspective, you're supposed to have it secured. And dude, I totally agree with that. But I've also been at this long enough to know that I've seen way too many bean counters that look at this and say, unless the control says specifically we have to do that, you're not getting a budget. So I think we need to be a little bit more specific about, how do we validate that you're not currently owned before that attestation gets applied? That would actually help address this. And again, it's not just PCI. We're certainly not picking on that attestation. If you look at SOC 2, you look at ISO, it's the same type of thing. And again, this has been that, to go back to my first slide, this is that, hole that's been in our mind for a while now that we really haven't turned to face and address to fill. And I think we're just starting to go through and do that now.
Well, I think the final question, and it's somewhat philosophical, but it might speak to your marketing and business model, your go-to-market strategy. If there's something that's not in PCI that needs to be in PCI, this is a good time to bring that up, because they're in the period for the better part of this year of asking people, how should we change PCI? Because they're in the process of ramping up to a version 4, which I think they're projecting to come out late 2020 is the last I heard. So now's a good time to bring it up. But but more specifically, if it's not in PCI, in my experience, having done PCI for 15 years, working with many customers, if it's not in PCI, they don't, for many of my customers, they don't care about it. So how do you sell this into a company that's beholden to PCI or some other compliance regulatory requirements, where so many of the companies, like you said, there's bean counters that say, well, it doesn't say to do that, so why should I do it? How do you get people over the hump there?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny, because when we started down this path, I was trying to think about what verticals could we fall into, and I really couldn't tag one in particular. And quite honestly, I think we're still in that boat, because we're seeing everything from department stores to law enforcement to I think this is, again, Moore's technology adoption curve explains all. I think we're still in that early adopter phase. I still think we're still in that phase where you're going to have some people that kind of recognize the business prop and how this gives them an advantage over everybody else. And then you've got that majority that say, no, until those early people bless it, I don't even want to pay attention to it. And I don't think we're quite into that area yet. I think we're starting to move there. I think that curve is starting to jump, but I don't think we're there quite yet. So there are folks out there that are looking at, hey, how do I validate my security? and they do, excuse me, they do get it. If I had to pick a vertical, though, I'd say it's probably law enforcement. We have a lot of that, and part of the reason is they go on. Someone gets owned, they get called in. So how do they deal with that? Well, we give them the ability to go in and say, just grab PCAPs. We don't expect you to load a new piece of software in every one of your systems. Grab some PCAPs, bring them back to a central location. They process it through, figure out what systems are compromised from there. The other one is oil and gas and energy companies seem to be big. We have a lot of those customers, and where they're coming in is, hey, we have these SCADA devices, we have these systems that we can't put endpoint controls on. A lot of them don't generate logs, but, hey, the whole Dynajack showed us they can get owned. They can be used for evil. So how do we monitor these things to figure out when they get owned? Those are the folks that seem to be kind of attracted to this as well. So yeah, I agree. We're still filling in and figuring out, we got a hole in our posture, and not everybody's getting it yet. And that's totally cool.
Yeah, I think it sounds similar to me when, I worked in vulnerability management, and when we would come up with newer ways to detect more vulnerabilities that allowed, people had to change the way they thought about it, right? To our previous discussion. Some customers or potential customers be like, well, if you did that, you'd find more vulnerabilities, and then we'd have more work, and then we wouldn't be compliant. And so we don't want, don't tell us about that stuff, because we can't handle what's on our plate now, and then we're not compliant, and the whole thing goes, and you just kind of sit there like, no, you got to secure what you know about. And if we're arming you with tools that allow you to know about more, it's more work, but at the end of the day, you're going to have a more resilient organization.
Agreed.
Right? And I think threat hunting falls also in that category, where if you're not looking, you may think that everything's fine, right? Until the day that you go look, right? Until the day you do authenticated vulnerability scan and you can see everything on the system.
Or the day the FBI shows up and says, look, you've been owned.
Yep.
Yes. We found this on Pastebin. Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, hey, I guess that is a valid security model.
More importantly, why didn't you find it?
Watch Pastebin to see when our stuff gets posted, and then we report an incident. Yeah.
Chris, anything more? I thought it was a good discussion, good debate, good topics to bring up, and I really do think that some people might be gun shy of doing threat hunting because you're afraid of what you're going to find, right? But I look at it in the reason John and I started these discussions, which led to where we are today, is that we were like, when we look, we find stuff. Right. And that's the starting point. That was the starting point for us. Right. And the starting point, I think, has always been, we're going to look through logs, and we're going to have AV, and we're going to feel secure. But when John and I started doing threat hunting, we're like, well, we can just go look and tell the organization where we're owned. And, I was doing this at the university for a lot of things. Like I said, packet captures and such were challenging, right? So I'd get whatever I could to do the threat hunting, let me find what's already been owned, and that's my starting point, right? Then you can say, what else in my environment looks like this, right? Or if I'm going to do forensics, let me do it here where I have a high degree of confidence that something has already been compromised.
I think working out that process is definitely something that we're still, as a community, coming up to speed, which is why I kind of jumped to a different deck. This isn't in the slides I shared with you guys. I'll happily kind of toss this over. But we're kind of working on what does a threat hunting run book look like? What is it you should do? And what are the steps you should go through? And, we've been really trying to kind of optimize this from a how can I figure out false positives and whitelist them versus something bad that I need to dig into the quickest. And the big steps we've really been able to kind of identify is, the first thing is, identify if there's a communication channel. Do you have an internal system carrying on a persistent connection with the host on the internet? If the answer to that is no, who cares about anything else? Who cares if a couple of SYN packets went to a blacklisted IP? It doesn't matter. If there's a persistent connection, now you care. If not, probably not. It's just noise, ignore it. After that, go in and look at the protocol. Is it being abused? Does the user agent make sense? The SSL negotiation, like we talked about, is it, are you looking at, TCP 443 traffic that isn't actually an SSL or a TLS session. That's a pretty good indicator that you got something backdoored. Once you've gone through that, look at your internal host. Is there anything interesting about that? We've had folks that, they've gone in, they've run the software, they see what looks like a beacon, but then they realize, oh, wait, this is just my, HVAC system reporting into a central console. Okay, yeah, right. Now that makes sense. But go through that internal system, scrutinize the endpoint out on the internet side. Once you've done that, you should have enough information to be able to figure out how to disposition things. So I agree. That process, I think that's something that's being still kind of vetted out. And threat hunting is still new enough that there's no acceptable standard for doing it like there is for, let's say, forensics. But I think we're getting there.
So I have to make a comment.
I have one more question. Or go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, I'd just like to make one comment, and this is a reflection of one of our very early customers of the efforts that we put into RITA at the time, which has now become this product. And it was like this. I asked one of our early customers, I said, look, could you make a comment about what you learned in the process of working with us? And he said to me, he goes, Jeff, I learned more about what is operationally normal that I never actually knew about before.
Yeah.
And so I think this actually kind of speaks to what what Chris is saying. There's a lot of operationally ordinary things that people don't know what's going on their network, and that the process of baselining that they are forced into with AI Hunter and the detection of beaconing technology forces them to actually sort out the wheat from the chaff, which I think is a very, very healthy process to go through.
So two comments on that. One, Jeff is awesome in a good way, even though it's going to sound bad, of making our lives miserable, because, oh my God, he is so good at writing command and control channels. So that's been awesome to kind of keep us on our toes. Second, I agree with him wholeheartedly. One of the things we ran into is we had a hospital as a customer, and, deployed, they were finding devices on their network thought were gone years ago that were still plugged in, getting an IP address. And still, quite honestly, some of them had like HTTP interfaces to them with like, basic authentication that were just totally easy to compromise. And they didn't even know these things were still there to have to be worried about. So just understanding what is normal for your network. Oh yeah, absolutely. That is the best place to start.
So I have a question, and it might be a two-part question, and it might be a little bit dicey per se, but my question is, with what you're suggesting in terms of, this new thing and the discussion we had earlier about, it's not covered by a lot of regulatory compliance regimens. And let's say, for the sake of argument, that the majority of the compliance regimens that are out there are based on sort of the classical approach to network, internet, cybersecurity, whatever you want to call it. My question is, are you willing to entertain that this new way of looking at things, this new way of discovering things in the network, does it eliminate or supersede any of sort of the traditional activities or methodologies that are performed in terms of network security?
Honestly, I don't think so. Because so like logging, I picked on that a lot, but quite honestly, I still think that has value. I think that once you've, let's say, gone through this step, identify that internal host, and you've made it all the way down to disposition to say, okay, I think there's something suspicious about that internal system. Next best place to go look is your internal logs. So I don't see this as something that replaces anything that we have in the market space today, but I do see that I see this as the underwear gnomes from South Park, quite honestly. This is step two. This is step two finally figured out.
And it's merely only an enhancement to that.
Yes.
Lee, the final question for Chris?
So I'm thinking about that, and you're saying it doesn't replace, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm sitting here with my staff of 2.3 analysts, and I want to take on threat hunting, but I can't add any more. So I was thinking it balanced out other activities, and it's a huge win. But what's the management argument to do more with the same?
So
where are we going to win?
Yeah, so agreed. So this is why we did this interface, and this is why we're creating the product the way it does. Dude, I totally feel your pain. I've run a number of SOCs, and my experience has been when you run a SOC, you have one really smart person. You have one person on your staff that's just a star. And then you have a couple of middle people, and then you have a ton of juniors because they're a dime a dozen and you get interns. Your senior person is already busy. They're the ones figuring out what process should we be using in the future, what tools should we be using. So anytime you get a new tool or process that only the most senior person can use, you're right, you're hosed. What are you going to do? So this is one of the reasons why we've been kind of moving the product towards, let us do that first pass for you. One of our earliest customers was a mid-sized city out in the western part of the United States. And they're a good-sized city, and they only have 2 security people for the entire city. But they have a help desk staff of 25. And what they needed was a solution that would let the help desk do the first pass at a threat hunt for them and only involve the senior people when needed. Well, that's where this interface came from. That was where we went through with them and said, okay, so what do you find interesting about your environment? What do you want these junior people to tag? Because we can probably go through and do an awful lot of that with software for you. So this isn't totally replacing the need for a person, but the idea is to kind of minimize that workload as much as possible. So you're right, for these SOCs, which, like I said, I feel your pain. I've been there. So many networks are just overloaded. You got to be able to have a junior person be able to sit down and look at this and make sense of it first. If they've got to be able to go through and do that, let's say, second round of disposition after the tool's already gone in and done the first for you. So those senior people are only getting bugged when absolutely necessary.
So this may sound naive, but then doesn't that also increase the value of the work the junior person's doing? They feel a little less junior. That's another win. Yeah,
exactly. This is a new skill set that they're going to learn, and it's a, how I want to say this, it's a hands-on skill set. It's like for those of us who are packet weenies, to sit down and even go through like awesome content like Judy Novak's is great material to go through and read. But until you start living it, it doesn't really sink in for you. And to have to deal with it on a daily basis, that forces it to sink in.
Well, Chris,
thank you
so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly. It was an awesome segment, awesome information, awesome discussion. So thank you again.
Awesome. Hey, thank you guys. Appreciate it, everyone.
And with that, we will take a short break, come back with the security news. Stay tuned.